We are live, Mr. Chairman. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the December 21, 2022 edition of the White Cliffs Committee. Pursuant to Senate 2985 as amended, a bill to extend certain COVID-related amendments to the open meeting law as modified by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, permitting remote meetings and participation until March 31, 2023, signed into law on July 16, 2022. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public would be permitted, and there will not be any public participation this afternoon. So with that as the opening, John, did you want to start with some opening remarks?
Yeah, if I may just set the table for a little bit of an update on where we are and what we need to do today, and a little bit about the process as we look forward. So first of all, we're very pleased to report to you, as you well know, we did receive by the deadline of December 8th, 3 proposals for reuse of the White Cliffs. Those 3 proposals have been distributed to the committee in anticipation of our meeting today. In addition, you did receive a initial memo assessment by Brett Pelletier from Kirk & Company, our consultant. So he provided the initial thoughts on the proposals. The big thing is determining whether or not the 3 proposers meet the minimum criteria. Just for those at home that may be watching, there's 2 levels. One is the minimum criteria to be considered further in this process. And then ultimately, there's a set of comparative criteria upon which the committee will make an assessment in terms of our ranking of the proposals that meet the minimum criteria. So in terms of the process moving forward, today, the limit in terms of the discussion on the proposals, we really need to just limit that to determining and voting on whether or not they meet the minimum criteria. Those proposals that do meet the minimum criteria are processed through our RFP, would be then to schedule interviews with those proposers who meet the minimum criteria. And that would be the process for us to gain additional information and insight into their proposals. In the interim, between today and those interviews, which will be scheduled mid-January, Brett Pelletier, our consultant, is going to do reference checks and a financial assessment on the proposals. So the way this process would ultimately unfold is he needs a few weeks to do that process, especially with the holidays. We would meet mid-January, have the interviews. At that point, we'd have the benefit of Brett's assessment with regard to references and financial information. And at that point, we'd have a full discussion. So then you have the proposals, the benefit of the interviews and getting your questions answered, Brett's reference checks, as well as the financial information. It would be in that context that as a group, we would then go down the comparative criteria, rank the proposals, and determine which one is the number 1 and number 2 and number 3. We'd rank them accordingly. And we could talk, there's obviously a lot more after that, but for purposes of today and over the next month, that's really what we need to get done. So with that, through the chair, what I'd recommend we do is I'm going to turn it over to Brett Pelletier, who walked through his memo, which basically is an initial assessment, particularly as it pertains to the minimum criteria. And then as a group, we should have a vote as to whether or not we're going to bring forward, which proposers we'll bring forward for interviews. Does that make sense? Okay, so through the chair, Brett, if you want to walk us through your initial assessment memo that was provided to the committee.
Sure. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. So the memo is relatively simple and straightforward, and I think fairly self-explanatory, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have on it once I've finished. But basically, I wanted to talk you through what I did. I read through the proposals or the responses and outlined each one of them basically and gave my recommendations to as to whether I thought they met the basic criteria to move on to the next step. As you know, we got three responses. I've broken them up into response number 1, response number 2, and response number 3. That's in no particular order, other than that's the order that I opened the files on my computer in the email. So the first response is from the Historic Artifact Preservation Organization. To cut to the middle of the page, they ticked all the boxes. It was a timely response. They included the project summary, a fairly robust project summary. They included their basic feasibility and financial projections through a pro forma, which was required, both on the construction and the operating side of things. So they had a number of pages of backup for that. And then their general discussion of community benefits, they ticked that box as well. And as you know from reading their proposal, it was a sort of a really interesting, unique blend of a bunch of different uses, including event space and sort of collaborative workspaces and a greenhouse and grounds and gardens and lots of references to community use, meeting spaces, offices, and things like that. It's a fairly robust document, so if you haven't gone through it in detail, I would advise that you do. As it relates to the various criteria, evaluation criteria that you have established and we have included in the RFP. And so I would suggest you read through my initial observations and recommendations as you think harder about this. The second proposal or response is from Metro West Collaborative Development, which is a collaborative nonprofit developer of housing and mixed-use projects in the geography. Additionally, was timely, had a very strong project summary. They had a well-developed feasibility and financial projection on the capital and operating side of things for their pro forma, and they had they were responsive in their community benefit discussion. And that proposal includes creation of some sort of intergenerational affordable housing, about 50 or so, 52 units. So, intergenerational, some families or young folks, some seniors kind of working together. It's an interesting model that has worked really well in the past. I've experienced that really neat combination of uses, and they really seem to integrate well together. And they described their prior capacity through projects that they had completed, both on the historic side and new construction side. So again, observations and recommendations. I recommend you take a look at that if you haven't already. The third is Down East Residential. They have proposed, or response number 3 is Down East Residential. They have proposed multifamily housing between 110 and 160 units. Some of it would be reserved as affordable, and some component would be commercial or food service or brewery or sort of as yet determined. They were on time. They included a project summary. They described the community benefits. However, they did not include a pro forma. They made some vague references to approximate costs and things like that within their narrative, but it didn't tick the box of providing feasibility or financial projections. And specifically, we asked for a pro forma, and I'm trying to find where are we here? The exact reference.
It's minimum criteria number 2.
Number 2.
Basic feasibility financial projections, pro formas, including sources, uses of funds demonstrating the financial feasibility of the proposal. Sources and uses of funds should be detailed as necessary in order for the town to understand the feasibility of the proposal. Letters of interest from funding sources and partners are welcome but not required. So that's that criteria.
Yeah. So it was my conclusion or recommendation that threshold had not been met in this proposal. So there are that's the long and the short of my initial analysis. And in the first paragraph for 2, I described some next steps, which John has effectively described, and we've got a pretty tight schedule and a pretty tight program going forward, going to be collecting some information from the market and their references. Additionally, we're going to gather some additional information so that I can report back to you on financial capacity and some additional underwriting criteria that I'd like to see. I think that's it from there. So yeah, and I will present that in a memo before the interviews. So you'll have my summary of all the references that I've checked and some color to fill in the blanks on the capacity and things like that. And I'll also write a bit about their financial capacity, which I will have reviewed confidentially in advance. So I'd be asking, for as much information as they're willing and able to give me on their financial capacity, and basically an underwriting exercise, both on the organization and the membership and the project itself. So we're going to kind of needle into their pro forma as much as we possibly can. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have one quick one, Brad.
Yes.
On your memo, you said that the Down East residential would be rejected. So does that mean they are not participating in the next round?
Well, that's my recommendation. That's certainly your purview as the committee.
Yeah, through the chair. In terms of today, Norm, that's really the decision that needs to be made today is which of these three proposals meets the minimum criteria and should move forward to the next stage, which would be interviews scheduled in mid-January. And in the interim, Brett will do his further reference checks and financial background checks as we go through there. We want to be careful not to delve into the comparative criteria. We don't want to prejudice the discussion. The idea is you want to have all the information, and then we have an informed discussion. And we can talk also about, between now and those interviews, just the questions, compiling the questions for those interviews. And so we can have a little bit through the chair, a little bit of that discussion today about the questions. Brett has outlined in his memo some of the specific areas and questions that we would want to probe. But my suggestion is going to be we have a brief discussion about some of those questions. But Brett will prepare some, and if the committee members prepare them, then we'll have a set of questions that we want to know information about from these proposers. And we're not trying to surprise anyone. This is going to be a long and collaborative project. Our intention is get all the questions in that people have and provide those to the proposer, to the respondents prior to the interview, and essentially bring them in and ask them to, do a presentation that covers and answers those questions. And then we can ask follow-up questions if we feel like our information wasn't asked. But we're not going to, the recommendation would be, that we don't bring them in and ask them, questions. We want real answers. So we want them to know what our questions and concerns are ahead of time. And then we'll judge how well they respond to those. So that's sort of the process that we're envisioning moving forward.
Yeah, it might be my sincere hope that if for those of you on the committee that have questions over the next few days, that you prepare them and send them to me by the end of next week so that I can incorporate those into, kind of synthesize everything and reduce redundancy, and have share those and prep the respondents so that they're prepared to hopefully very efficiently answer a number of those questions in their presentation, and then we can dig into them a little harder.
We can also give them the opportunity, if it makes sense, to provide additional written information responding to some of those questions, because again, we're going to have limited amount of time. So we want to get to the bottom of the questions and the answers that we're looking for. So, and we're not trying to surprise anybody. This is a unique project, as I've said. That's going to be a very long collaboration on part of the town and whoever the successful proposer is. So in terms of what the first thing that we need to do and should be discussed through the chair with a formal vote is determining which of these respondents will move forward to that interview process, and which, if any, would not. So
So do you want to have a vote for each one, sort of an up and down vote as to they meet criteria?
Yeah, you can do them together. You can do them individually. You can certainly do it as an individual vote.
All right, we can do them all as one. Somebody want to make a motion?
Well, we want to, yeah, I guess to be fair, why don't we, I said one thing and then I backed off. Why don't we take them individually? That way we're clear and we're discussing each one to make sure that everybody is solid and that it should move forward.
And I guess I should probably throw out there, is anybody want to any discussion about sort of what Brett had talked about before we get into this part of the program?
I have a question, but maybe it's better brought up on the individual one. So Brett has recommended that we kind of eliminate one from the list, and I'm not sure that I feel comfortable doing that. So do you, I don't know when to voice that. Do you
Yeah,
want to start with
Why don't we
one
take them
and-
individually? That makes more sense, Julianne. Why don't we take them individually and then we can have that discussion and take a vote if that makes sense through the chair. So,
Sure. So we'll
we just
get to the one you're talking about. We'll
Yeah,
have a
so
discussion.
just if somebody wants to make a motion for response number one, a historic artifact preservation organization, that they would move forward, then we can have a discussion and a vote.
So I think the motion we're looking for is whether or not the Historic Artifact Preservation Organization met the evaluation criteria,
Minimum evaluation criteria.
minimum evaluation criteria.
Yes, sir.
Well, if I say so moved, we can move that along.
Yeah, second it,
Second? Oh,
All right.
Tom did it.
double second.
And for the roll call vote, Julianne,
Yes.
Diana,
Yes.
Norm,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes,
and I vote yes, so that one moves forward. Next. To have a motion for whether the Metro West RFP or response, I should say, meets the minimum criteria.
So moved.
second,
All right, any discussion? Julianne? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think in terms of meeting the minimum criteria, I don't really see that there's a lot of community availability on that one. I mean, it said, right? Didn't it say?
It's a general discussion of community benefits is the minimum criteria.
But I guess we didn't specifically say how much community availability, so I'm a little concerned about the limited community availability on that one. But I think in terms of meeting the criteria, yes. But I think also for me, there's even a more basic question, which is when the town voted and when we brought this all forward, we're really using a lot of the land. And I think we're going to have to clear in our heads how much of the land we really want to use.
I think that's way down the decision discussion pipeline, but understand that is a concern.
But there is, in this proposal, it does mention that certainly the first floor of the mansion would be an event space. So,
But you would have, it's not like available to the whole town all the time, because I think it's that little neighborhood that they're going to develop. But you're right, Norm. It basically meets the criteria. I would agree with you.
Yeah, and I would say that the criteria is a discussion of community benefit. It isn't a merit-based discussion. So.
All right, well, we still have the motion before us. Julianne, you're up.
Yes.
Diane,
Yes.
Yeah.
Norm,
Yes,
Tom,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Moving on. All right, so now we have the response offered by Down East Residential and the discussion as to whether it met the minimum criteria. Anybody have any comments on that?
according, excuse me, is it all right, Todd, if I speak?
Absolutely.
Line. So according to Kirk and Company's evaluation, they feel that they did not meet the minimum criteria for basic feasibility and financial projections. Am I understanding that correct? Or do we agree with that?
That is the assessment, and yes, they really did not provide any of that information.
Certainly my
Well, they
view.
provided some information. They didn't do tables and specific, rental projections like the historic organization or Metro West, but they provided minimum. I would say they provided less information than the other two. But again, I have to go back to when we put out this RFP. I thought that the whole tone of it was supposed to be submit your proposal, we'll work with you, we're going to be flexible. So I don't know. I mean, it's not like we have 12 proposals here. We only have 3, and to eliminate one, I would like to hear more from them.
Well, I'm looking what they presented is a one-page proposal. If you look at their document, very little backup, very little information. I'm really disappointed that they consider this to actually be a proposal. I've looked at proposals in my career. This is like a white paper. Give us an idea what you think you'd like to do. We're way beyond that. We want nuts and bolts numbers. So that's my 2 cents on that particular proposal.
If I might mention the scale of the project of 110 to 160 units without any kind of site plan suggesting where they would go. I mean, that's a lot of building. And you think the Metro West proposal uses up a lot of space. You try to do 3 times as many units without any suggestion of where you're going to put them. That would be disqualifying alone for me.
I would just, through the chair, add, one of the things here is we're looking for partners who are serious, very serious, and have put the time and energy into a thoughtful proposal. If we had nobody else, this proposal would probably have a chat with them. But when you compare it to the detail and the thoughtfulness of the other 2 proposals, they're viable for further discussion for sure. And out of respect for the work that they put in on the front end and the rather long process that we're going to have to weed these down to come to a preferred option, that's where I think the committee and the town may benefit from spending their time and energy. But I'll leave it to the committee. You've heard from the consultant. The staff does not see this as meeting the minimum criteria. The purpose of establishing minimum criteria is to make sure that the folks that come into the process are really serious about moving forward and have given it the appropriate amount of thought and energy at this stage. So,
Mr. Chairman, the RFP clearly indicates pro forma to be included, and it wasn't. There was no beating around the bush on what a pro forma is. It was not just spelled out. It was literally spelled out in the RFP, and it was not submitted.
Yeah, and Brett can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any discussion as to how much it's going to cost or how they're going to pay for it at all.
There is not.
Right, and that's a fail in my view.
Yeah, and I would say that's the intention of the process, is to gather that information We specifically didn't solicit, a request for qualifications or a request for interest that would then move to a stage where we're actually receiving proposals where you would find that information. As a matter of fairness, that's what the criteria you have to work with. And, we specifically asked for sources and uses of funds so that we could measure whether or not we thought this was a mutually feasible project.
Well, to give you some sense of scale, if you were to get 160 units on this site, go up to Lyman Street and look at the Pulte development near Lake Chauncey and envision 3 of those buildings surrounding the White Cliffs Mansion. That's what you'd have to build in order to get that total on this site. So it would be totally overwhelming if there are 3 or 4 story apartment buildings. So I don't think it's feasible.
I also feel like they just really ignored what was requested from the RFP in terms of their submission. And that gives me concerns about the whole picture, kind of as John was saying, in the world of public proposals, if you can't respond to what is requested, then why are you presenting your qualifications? There's nothing, I mean, we couldn't even evaluate what they've given us based on the criteria that we have outlined.
So if I may, I agree with what all of you are saying completely. But and maybe it was my misinterpretation of when we were talking about this. And I go back to, I thought we agreed that we were going to be flexible. It was going to be very, wasn't going to be so specific because we wanted to hear new ideas and what people were going to bring to the table. And, if anybody watched those meetings, they might have come away with, this, what they're looking for is very general ideas and answers to these questions. And I go back to, we have 3 proposals. How much more time would it be really for us to interview all 3 people? So much of information comes when it's, person to person, one-on-one, rather than just looking at these, these written proposals. I just would like to give everybody a chance to the next step.
Through the chair, my only comment to that is we did have those discussions about being flexible and open. That's why we did establish just very basic minimum criteria that they didn't meet. Whatever the committee would like to, the point is, out of fairness of the people who did respond and read the proposals and provide the minimum criteria to get to the next stage, to have those more fruitful discussions and interview. Again, the committee established the minimum criteria. You should follow the criteria that you established in a public bidding process. So if the majority of the committee thinks they met the minimum criteria, then we should move forward. If we don't, then they should not move forward.
Well, could we say that they met the minimum of the minimum? Because honestly, whether or not we like their idea, and I have lots of questions about all 3 of the ideas. Can you really outright say, hey, you didn't answer this question?
Yes.
I don't have a problem saying this is not an acceptable proposal at all.
It does not meet the minimum criteria.
It looks like they did this over a 2-hour lunch. It's very disappointing that they would burden us to look at something like this. I'm willing to make a motion if it's the right time.
It's always the right time, Norm.
All right. I'd like to make a motion that we reject Down East Residential from further consideration.
For failure to meet the minimum criteria.
Failure to meet the minimum criteria. Thank you, John.
Second,
All right. Julianne, I'm going to start with you.
No.
Diana,
Yes.
Norm,
Yes.
Tom,
yes,
and I vote yes. Motion carries.
Okay, through the chair, the next piece just for us to do today, it would be to pick a date for interviews. And then as Brett mentioned, he'll be putting questions together. And then as committee members have questions that they would like asked of the two proposals that are moving forward, to get those to him. And then he'll compile a master list of questions. And then ultimately those questions will be provided to the proposers in advance of the interviews, and they can either respond in writing and or verbally through the interview process, if that makes sense. One of the dates, we were just working with Brett initially. We were looking at January, it's Thursday, January 12th, starting at 9 a.m. The interviews would be 90 minutes each. So there'll be two of them. So we'd go from 9 to 12 noon on Thursday, January 12th. That's the date we're trying to get in the ground here, if that works for everybody.
Will those be virtual or in person?
Good question. Probably at this stage, for just transparency, we probably would do them virtually.
Is there any way, like we did the community preservation meetings this year, where we could do them in face-to-face, but have them recorded, broadcast live?
You could, yes. We could meet in person, and with this amount of time, I can make arrangements with cable access. We meet in the selectmen's meeting room, and it could go out live, if that would be the preference of the committee.
Well, my preference would be at some point to meet these people face-to-face, but that's my preference.
Okay. Let's start with,
think
through the
it's
chair,
more-
if I may, does the date work? Does January 12th, 9 to 12 work for everybody?
Good for me.
Good for me.
Yep.
Again, we only have the one date, so hopefully that works with enough advance notice for the two proposers. We'll reach out to them today and confirm that. Okay. And then do we want to do this, the interview in person?
My preference is in
Broadcasting
person.
live on Access?
Yeah, my preference is in person.
Okay,
I agree. I think it's a more fruitful discussion in person.
okay. So by consensus, we'll schedule the room. We'll do the meeting in person.
With the hybrid option, right?
We don't have a hybrid option. That's why we're either Zoom. There's no hybrid option. It'll be in person and it'll go out live over cable access.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be recorded and go out live. Hybrid implies that we're gonna have people calling in from remote. We don't have that capability. That's why
As
we're
long
either
as it's
Zoom or in person.
recorded, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it'll go out live as well. It'll be recorded, but go out live as well, Julianne, if that's the question.
Yes.
It's just that the
thank you.
committee's not hybrid. That's what you mean, John. Like this group is not hybrid. We would all be there. Right.
Well, again, we wouldn't have the proposer calling in by Zoom or
Right.
residents calling in. That's what we mean when we say hybrid. It's in person and remote access. In person, it's just going out over cable access like it used to do before the pandemic. So it'll go out live so people can either attend or watch it in real time. Okay. All right. Brett, will you contact our friends and confirm that those dates and times work for them? And I'll let you schedule based on their availability, which one comes in first or second.
Sure.
Okay, great. And then I'll schedule the room and we'll make sure that we get the agenda posted. So then between now and then, Brett's going to do his reference checks and his financial review memo, which we'll get to you in advance of the interviews. And then if there are specific questions on the proposals, Norm, I know has a couple of thoughts, but the idea is to let us let Brett know if you send them to him directly, any questions that you want answered from either of these respondents. We're going to give them those questions ahead of time. That way they're prepared to either provide stuff in advance of the meeting or answer the questions during the meeting. The idea is that hopefully their presentations would cover most, and then there would be a chance for follow-up questions to get the information that we're seeking, if that makes sense.
I guess the only question I would have is, a request I would have is, when Brett, when you put all of our questions together and compile them into making them some sense, I'm not sure the ones I all sent make sense. Could you forward that to us in advance of the visit on the 12th? That would just be.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you'll have a sort of a consolidated, so sort of a list of things that you can keep track of.
Thank you.
And it sounds like some of those we may have written responses for in advance of the interview. Is that true also?
I think we give them the option, again, it's, we're allotting 90 minutes, but, if there's information that they can provide in advance, we'll kind of leave it to them. How do they want to handle it? Do they want to do it in their presentation, or do they want to provide us, some of this information written? I would hope that they would want to give some of the more basic stuff, in writing, so that, it just helps. If they know the answer, it just helps. If it's something they feel they need to speak to, then we'll have that conversation in the interview. So. And we may look, just so I'm clear here, we want to make sure that the committee has the information that it needs to make an informed decision. So you'll have Brett's reference and financial memo, the questions, the interview. Then at that point, if there's additional information that we feel we need, we can always make that request before we have the discussion to rank them to using. And look, by law, you have to, the whole point of doing this public process is you have to use the criteria that you've created. You can't throw it out or then make it up. So within the criteria, the comparative criteria, we're going to have to evaluate and rank the two proposals for recommendation. So if the committee feels like it doesn't have all the information, they're not ready to do that, we can ask, again, after the interviews, request additional information. But at the point at which we sit down, and whether it happens on January 12th, or the committee feels like they want to think on it a little bit, or there's a few things that didn't get answered and we want to follow up, we can do that and then schedule a meeting to formally rank the proposals. Again, people want everybody to feel comfortable as you're going to be, given the fact that, there's a lot of unknowns that are going to remain even as we go through and narrow it down to the preferred proposal. There's still going to be a lot of information that's going to have to be forthcoming and developed. So one other thing, if I can mention through the chair, is that in terms of, what's the step after that? So after this group ranks the top proposal, that we would make a recommendation, or the committee would make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen about which group that should move forward. From there, it's going to depend. There's not a lot of time, and it's a very complicated process. So we'll have to figure out what the timing of this would be. If it would be something that would be ready to go to town meeting in April, or some piece of it ready to go to town meeting in April, or would require additional time. That remains to be seen. So let the process sort of unfold as it will, through this next stage, and then we can kind of make some decisions about timelines at that point in time. I did have some preliminary discussions with town council about approvals and structures and the legal process that would need to take place. His recommendation is let's see where you are after you conduct your interviews, and how fully developed these proposals are, and whether or not and get a sense. I think in part, one of the things that we want to ask of the two respondents that we're going to interview is, what's their, a little bit more detail in terms of your timeline. So hopefully that makes sense.
I do have one more question, directed to you, John. What's the best way of getting input from the community? I've already had several emails on this topic, and I'm just wondering what's the best way to get their input?
So,
I don't know, I'm not sure I want 200 emails on this topic. Email address. But
well, I mean, again, that's something the committee would need to decide if you want to take input following, the interviews. That might be, or take public input prior to the formal ranking and recommendation. That would be up to the committee. Again, on the front end, there was a great deal of outreach that was done with all, Brett met with every board and committee in town. We took a lot of input in terms of what the committee is seeking for the comparative criteria. So a lot of that was done on the front end. But if the committee wants to add some public input component to it prior to, the rankings or the proposals, that's something we can talk about.
it makes sense to wait till the interview starts. I get it. Okay.
Okay.
That it for the main event?
I don't have anything else, Mr. Chairman.
We can do the minutes. Go back to item 1.
Mhm.
Feel free to make a motion, anyone.
Yeah, I was looking for the minutes. Here we go. I can make a motion to accept the White Cliffs Committee meeting minutes for September 22nd, 2022.
Second,
All right. Julianne,
aye.
Diana,
Yes.
Norm,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes,
and I vote yes, so minutes are approved. That, is there any other business to come before the commission?
Can I ask a question about all of this? So I'm serving on the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and we're doing a whole downtown revitalization plan. And then we also have the MBTA community possibility that we have to be considering. How are we going to make sure that this project complements downtown revitalization, addresses MBTA community? Where does that all come together and when?
I think that's the question you should pose to the interviewees.
So I think you just put your first question in right there for Brett.
Yeah. I mean, I
But
think
is
both of
that
those are
their
good to have them talk about.
responsibility? Is that their responsibility? I mean,
Well, some
well,
of them have
Metro
already
West
thought
does
about it.
address that in their proposal. They address both those issues. They address housing and how it relates to schooling. They address the revitalization of downtown. They address the adjacent community issue. It's all in their proposal already. Maybe not answered to your satisfaction, but those components are addressed.
so yes, so Tom, my question is then, I guess it's more with the MPIC committee, this committee, and planning, because they'll do MBTA. Who decides where denser housing should be? Should denser housing be at White Cliffs, or should it be in more in the downtown revitalization area? Where does all that get synthesized?
That's the
Probably
planning
on
board
your
that is
committee,
having those
huh?
discussions.
Yeah.
The
Planning board,
MBTA,
okay.
the MBTA zoning is something that the planning board is working on. Lori Connors, town planner, is working on getting some technical assistance on that. And as far as the downtown, that was one of the things that we discussed in our RFP was how does your project relate to downtown revitalization?
The good news on
if I
this.
could-
Oh, I'm sorry, Laurie, go ahead.
As far as the White Cliffs is concerned and the MBTA requirements, we have discussed the possibility that if the town decides to pursue the Metro West proposal, then it may be appropriate to include White Cliffs within the overlay zoning that we're interested in putting forward. It's a 7-acre parcel, so that would make sense. If, however, the decision is to go forward with the alternative proposal, then clearly the White Cliffs would not be included within the rezoning. So there's flexibility. You know, I have discussed it with the planning board, and I think that they're willing to be flexible at this point, because there are certainly benefits to both proposals from an economic development standpoint, downtown revitalization standpoint, as well as an affordable housing and MBTA standpoint. So I don't think either one would be a negative that would negatively impact the downtown revitalization. I think they both would be a plus, just different.
What I was gonna say is, usually when you have a problem, there's a big hiccup is because of miscommunication. And right now, Julianne, you're on the Master Plan Implementation Committee, so you'll be aware of what we're doing and they are. And of course, Laurie's between the planning board and the other programs. The people that are involved with White Cliffs right now in this mosaic of people, we got a good group because we interact with other commissions, and of course, me being on the historical commission. So I'm not worried that we won't communicate. I mean, I think there'll be some challenges.
Is it unprecedented to have all the committees meet before we decide on one? At least MPIC, planning, and White Cliffs?
How does that work though? If this is only one of the criteria that we've established and we're really, we're sticking to the sort of required criteria, and this is but one piece of that. So it seems to me like our charge is still to evaluate the response to the RFP, the criteria, and how they align with it in the way that we would select this. And as Laurie's saying, both offer different approaches, but they both align with certain aspects of Northborough's goals. So I guess my question about your comment, Julianne, is that if you had all those people together, at the end of the day, that's still only going to impact 20% of what we are essentially voting upon, if I'm understanding the criteria ranking process correctly.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess my goal is just to make sure that that when this is all said and done in 25 years, when the revitalization occurs and White Cliffs occurs, we look back and say, yeah, that was the place that's really working out with the, the community center there and the event space there, whichever one we choose. And so I guess that kind of goes back to Norm's point too. I would say that listening to all the comments is always very informative, isn't it?
Well, I hope I'm here in 25 years to be able to make that evaluation.
You will be.
I hope you are too. And all of us are.
Okay, so next meeting is right now, tentatively, assuming it works for the respondents, would be Thursday, January 12th from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. So 90 minutes each. So make sure you plan accordingly for that time. And then the committee can decide and discuss the process after that. Does that make sense? Okay.
All that remains is a motion to adjourn.
Can I, before, John, while I've got you all here, whoever has custody of the principles of the Historic Artifact Preservation Organization contact information, I don't have it. I've just got a mailing address for Mark and Nick. If there's an email or a phone number or something like that, that would be helpful. It's not included in the RFP response, so I want to make sure I can actually contact these guys.
Yeah, Lori, if you want to check the original, I'm not sure if you have the original, if there was any additional contact information.
Yes, I will check. I might also have a business card from when they dropped it off. I'll look.
Okay.
Oh, you may have there may be some information from the walkthrough, the sign-in sheets, Brett, but we'll check and see if we can get that to you.
Great.
I can make a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
Second,
All right, Julianne,
aye.
Diana,
Yes.
Norm,
Yes.
Tom,